A warm welcome from TALKWALK. This is Minoli de Almeida, continuing the series on the psychosocial impact of post-COVID, which has devastated us all. This series is intended to help us overcome these issues and face the new normal. Remember, our emotions make or destroy us. In this episode, we focus on animal rights and welfare. Mahatma Gandhi said, "The greatness of a nation depends entirely on the way they treat its animals." We in this country are born and bred, and we are supposed to practice ahimsa or kindness, which is a way of life. Being cruel and evil is contrary to this belief. The Animal Rights and Welfare Bill is rusting away in Parliament. Through successive governments, it is not being legalized for reasons best known to them. The elephant-human conflict is critical. In my opinion, the villagers should be relocated, the elephants given back their habitat, which was robbed from them in the name of development. The horrific snares, how cruel are people to execute them. That poor dog who was wired up, offered as a bait to those beautiful leopards. We lost the black beauty through this. Deterrent measures should be taken immediately to punish the perpetrators, as our law is archaic and the fines are a bigger joke. We have to do something to save the wildlife before it is extinct. Pet shops. What a sad sight there. Animals and birds cramped in cages with broken limbs, broken necks, waiting to be sold. Is this the cruelty that is showcased for our children? Dogs. The street dogs. How are they on the street? It is because we throw them onto the street. They are territorial and they serve as security to us, to the neighborhoods. They're happy in their place and happy with a morsel of food that a generous being would give them. As Mark Twain said, "The kindness is a language that the deaf can hear and the blind can see." Let us all as Sri Lankans join together, be kind to each other, and above all, be kind to the helpless animals who have no voice. On our panel today, we have Rukshan Jayawardena, Anusha David, Mahesh Senaratne, and Dr. Nalinika Obesekara. Rukshan Jayawardena is an alumni of the University of Cambridge. He's an anthropologist and an archaeologist. He has had many experiences in the field of exploration and documentation in 8 districts of our country. He is a serious wildlife photographer who showcases Sri Lanka's remarkable biodiversity to improve the standards of wildlife photographers. Taken by Sri Lankans, he is passionate on the long-term conservation of the leopard. He was president of the Wildlife and Nature Protection of Society of Sri Lanka, which is in the 126th years, I beg your pardon, of its existence. Rukshan, what is your advice on the plight of the wildlife in Sri Lanka?
Well, there has to be more attention on their conservation. Well, Sri Lanka's wildlife is very diverse and still exists in numbers that are quite difficult to kind of understand in a country with a population, a human population that's approaching 22 million. and that's partly because human beings have been concentrated in certain areas, and there are large tracts of wilderness that still exist. And these wilderness tracts, at least 50% of them are protected. But the unprotected lands now are under serious threat. Well, there is a degree of protection for all wilderness lands, but there is a new circular that is about to be rescinded by the government, which is called 5/2001, and which protects what are called other state forests. And if that happens, because these other state forests are strategically placed between other protected areas, which are protected by either wildlife protection, fauna and flora protection ordinance, or the forest ordinance. So actually a network of protected lands have allowed the diversity in Sri Lanka to be sustained into the 21st century. But now in this second decade of the 21st century, or just before the third decade, we are facing one of the greatest challenges to Sri Lanka's wildlife and diversity.
It is so sad, isn't it? This is the truth. These are facts. Anusha David, the well-known animal rights activist, also the joint chairperson of Headlines, a PR firm, who has a shelter for rescued animals, is better known for feeding stray dogs. Anusha, what is your take on this, on the wildlife, on stray dogs actually?
Well, as you all know, wildlife is I think we are not going to be having any wildlife very soon, as Rukshan said. As for us community dogs, who we no longer refer to them as stray dogs, we refer to them as community dogs. Their plight is also in grave danger, mainly due to, or I would say 100% due to human beings who are extremely irresponsible. We have a belief in this country that if you sterilize a dog in your next birth, you are unable to give birth to children. Where these archaic beliefs come from, God only knows, but they are very prevalent in this country. In fact, I know vets who will not sterilize a dog if their wife is pregnant. So how do you overcome problems like this? How do you overcome archaic beliefs and practices like this? I mean, we are in the 20th century, we are in 2020. And to think that we still have doctors who believe implicitly in archaic beliefs like this. Most of the community dogs, I would say every single community dog in this country, is a result of owners not sterilizing their dogs. We now have, at the last count, this was in 2016, Nalnika, correct me if I'm wrong, but the count was 500,000 community dogs across the island, around the island. I have friends who live in Colombo 7, Colombo 5, who do not sterilize their dogs, but when the dog is pregnant, the mother and the puppies are thrown out in the pouring rain. Some years ago, we lived in Malabar. We moved out because of the animals. And every single dog down that road, Godalawat Road in Malabar, was the result of Snoopy and his wife Lulu, whose owners refused to sterilize them. And finally, when we left Malabar, they agreed to let me sterilize all the dogs down the road. Finally, this is after 8 or 9 years of trying to persuade them to allow me to do this. That pair gave birth to something like 75 dogs, all of them who inhabited Godalawat Road, and all of whom were fed by me, because of course the owners never feed their dogs. They believe that dogs are there to protect them and that the animals can scavenge for food whenever that's possible. Colombo is no different. I've been in animal welfare for over 40 years now, and to date we feed over 300 community dogs from Aturgiri right up to Galface. And it's very sad, you know, because all these animals are a result of careless human beings. We throw stones at animals, we pour hot water on them. Oh, it's very common, pouring hot water on a dog or a cat, and through no fault of their own. You know, it's all because of human beings have refused to sterilize them, refused to look after them. We Sri Lankans do not believe in keeping our animals within our compound. A couple of months ago, a Nona dog, who belonged to Mr. Brito Fernando, he was shot at because he urinated on the criminals, on the perpetrator, the guy who actually shot the dog, because the dog urinated on his wall. But having said that, if you own a dog, that dog should be kept within your premises. You should not allow the dog to go roaming around. And this is what happens continuously in Colombo and out of Colombo. Again, about a month ago, there was a spaniel who was spotted on Tungmula Junction, and all the animal welfare activists got alarmed because we thought that the dog had been dumped, because it was an old dog. And we all sprang into action to see that this spaniel belonged to a household living in the Bullers Road area. And they said, oh no, but you know, he's always like this, he always goes running, you know, wandering around. Now this is irresponsible and careless on the part of the owners. I mean, if you have a dog, that dog should be in your premises. You should look after the dog, not let it go wandering around all over. I mean, you wouldn't let your child go wandering all over unattended. So the same thing, if you have a dog, you look after it. Again, very recently, this must have been about 3 weeks ago, I had the friend of a friend calling me saying, oh Anusha, you know, can you find a home for my mother's spaniel? So I said, why, what's wrong? Oh, but my mother is very old now, and you know, the servants don't want to look after the dog. So can you find a home for the dog? So I turned around and said, you know, will the same thing apply to your mother as well? Would you want to find another home for your mom because she's also old and you can no longer look after her? And then we throw stones at dogs. We say they should be killed. We don't want dogs on our roads, when we are responsible for putting them there. So one thing is the laws have to be changed. The Animal Welfare Bill has to be brought into effect post haste. It's been in the pipeline for the last 25 or 30 years. Responsible pet ownership has to be enforced legally. Fines that where people will actually feel it should be enforced for abandoning your pet. And an animal should be treated as part of a family. If you bring an animal home, then it's your responsibility, not somebody else's. That is really the test of a developed country. The way we treat our animals, the way we treat our old people, the way we treat our children, the way we treat our disabled. They are not to be scorned. They are not to be thrown, you know, we shouldn't be throwing stones at them. We shouldn't scorn them. We shouldn't look down on them. That is the true test of development. Not high-rise buildings, not flyovers. The true test of a country's greatness, the true test of a country's development is how we treat the weak and the innocent and the voiceless.
Well said, Anusha. I think we have to start an education campaign. We have to educate all of us on how to be...
Starting with the politicians.
Mahesh Senaratna, a criminal lawyer, thespian, wildlife photographer, and a wildlife enthusiast, loves the jungle and finds the slightest excuse to escape into the jungle, having conservation experience in projects in other countries. This, he says, could be adopted through a legal framework in Sri Lanka. Please advise us how you would do this.
So, I think to echo much of what Rukshan said also, I of course firmly believe that you can't have conservation without making all the stakeholders economically viable. In that, so you in your when you started also you said that there's an issue with the villagers and all that sort of thing. So unless the villagers and say if it's a safari drivers or the jeep holders, their families, they will economically benefit from something, that you are not going to make that conservation effort successful. I mean, like from what I've seen in other countries, even if you take South Africa, so if you take Sabi Science, which is a private conservancy, they have to fund schools, build communities outside of the jungle area and continue to fund those, and that is how the community there benefits from what is going on inside the park. So if you take Brazil for instance, so the Pantanal, where all the jaguars are there and all the jaguar sightings are there, and they conduct the safaris. So a few years ago they did a study and found that per cattle that the farmers there made $2,500 per cattle per year. So what they did was they made a projection and they showed how per jaguar that the farmers can earn $12,500 per year. So unless the people who are immediately affected, it is all well and good for us to sit here and talk about conservation and how conservation should be, because that is a very first world view to have of conservation. But unless those people who are immediately affected by those gets compensated and has an economic stake in it, it's not going to move forward. Even in India, I believe, like the moment if a tiger or something escapes and attacks their farm life, whatever, they get compensated. So the legal framework now, I believe, actually because of this I went through all the laws that is relevant to Sri Lanka. The issue is not so much with the laws that we have as at present. I mean, even in the animal cruelty law, it's the offences are well defined. Every single thing that we spoke about is defined. But the problem is, as she very correctly said, when it comes to the punishment, your punishment is 100 rupee fine. So your people will do all that, and also the judge has a discretion. So to extend only up to 3 months. So we have the provisions in place. I don't think a new act will magically somehow alleviate all our problems. That's not going to happen. We have to have the political will to implement the acts that we have now, and we also need to have the collective will to make sure that these acts are implemented. And also conservation is not only about the law. You have to have that will to know that this is needed, this is good for the country, and to move forward from there. And so I do have a few ideas. I mean, as we go along, you can discuss about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the policymakers must take note of what he's saying, and together with us, we must all contribute to this, because one person can't alone do this for the animals. Dr. Nalinika Obesekara, the veterinary surgeon, who is the darling of all sick animals. She has such a caring and love to all animals that is suffering and who are sick. And the owners, the pet owners who are stressed out, find so much of solace when we see her, because she has magic in her hands. Please tell us how you cope with all these sick animals.
Coping with sick animals, again, like all of these problems that we are faced with in terms of wildlife as well as roaming dogs, sort of fundamentally come through people's knowledge, education, attitudes, intrinsic responsibility towards other creatures, and not just owned dogs and owned pets. Owned pets are a good start because it teaches people to accept a completely different species, and it teaches people that these species are actually, they're not small people, they're something very different, and yet really interesting and useful and pleasant to have around, even though they are different. So I think owning a pet is the sort of a small start to making people think of others rather than just think of ourselves, and also think of diversity as being something good, think of differences as being something good. So I think that's sort of a start. And again, when it comes to illness and sickness in animals, it really shows how much people can care care for an animal to the extreme, just like they care for their children, but it also has a very big component of responsible pet ownership or responsibility towards that species, not just having it in the house, not just enjoying the pleasant and the good things that you get from it. Same with wildlife, same with anything else. I mean, you know, we all love going out and seeing that leopard out there, but what responsibility do we take towards ensuring that leopard actually has a lifestyle that suits its needs and also has the space or whatever to still exist? And the same with dogs and cats. If you have a pet, it's not just feeding and having him around the house and giving it a nice pet or hug or cuddle when you come home, but it's taking it for walks, it's de-ticking, it's brushing, it's giving a bath, it's doing all those things that are also a lot of work in return. And I think that balance, that if we achieve that balance, we will have healthier animals, we will have a healthier planet in a bigger sense, because the core to all of this, the core to keeping another species healthy, and not just physically healthy, but physically and mentally healthy, is to understand that it's different, to understand what its requirements are, and take the responsibility and the action to ensure those requirements are met. So, and that's true whether it's a cat or a dog or a hamster or a leopard. You know, they are different animals and they require special care.
I'm afraid we got to stop for a while for a short commercial break. We'll see you in a while. Welcome back to TALKWALK. This series is designed to help us overcome the psychosocial impact of post-COVID. Today we are discussing on animal rights and welfare. And where were we? We were with Dr. Nalanika Obesekara. You want to elaborate more on what you thought on implementation of the laws? There was a bit of confusion there.
Well, I think two things. One is there are some laws in existence already, and there are problems with them. They're not perfect, but they do exist. But even to the extent to which they exist, we don't utilize them for, again, all sorts of bureaucratic reasons, like the difficulty of getting action through the police, getting action through courts, and all of that. People are discouraged from even bothering to try and take any kind of legal action about any kind of animal abuse that you see. The second part of it is, of course, even if you do go through all the cost and energy and trouble to take someone to court about, say, an animal welfare issue or abusive issue where you know you have evidence, all of that, the fines are so small that you probably spend a lot more just getting that and get to court and getting something out of court than you would gain by doing it. And so all of us, most animal welfare people, are very tight on funds. We have a lot to do with the little money that we've got, and you don't want to throw it into something like that where you know you're not really going to get much in return. So I think with the legal side, that's one of the problems. With the new animal welfare bill, it is more potent. I think if, as a bill on paper, in theory, the way it is set up, has more power behind it than the older animal welfare laws. However, even the best law that you can come up with, if you manage to get it passed, is only as useful as how it is actioned. So if you're not able to actually action these things and take decisive measures to make sure that what's in the law is actually translated into society, then it doesn't matter how many laws you have. It's not going to help. And that's where I think we really fail as a society. There may be laws and laws in everything, in every area. There are tons of laws, and most of those laws are pretty good. We have had a history of a good judicial system, a good legal system, so probably some of the foundations of those laws are good, but the implementation of them is just not getting us anywhere. And more laws, the animal welfare bill I really do support. I think it's great to have it, but again, having it alone is not going to solve the problem.
So what do you think the solutions and the long-term sustainability, what do we do?
The long-term sustainability, I think, has to come from public education, from changes in attitudes. There are much more fundamental things. Society as a whole, the way we are, needs to change in some fundamental ways, and that's not easy, admittedly. I mean, it's not easy to do that, but we have to keep working to doing that, because responsibility, taking responsibility for species other than ourselves, and understanding that differences are good, being different is good, understanding that we all share one planet, all of those things, those are not legal issues. They're not things that you can action through law. You can to some extent, but you have to really action that through, I would say, a really sophisticated marketing drive, to be honest, because just education through schools and stuff like that somehow doesn't really have the impact we would like it to have. But we know from modern society that really good marketing drives and programs do change people, and really to have an impact on animal welfare, to understand diversity, to understand the value of us living and sharing a planet, to understand all that requires a really significant change in attitude.
Don't you think the private sector too should be supportive towards this?
Yeah,
because the government alone can't do this.
Of course. The private sector is really good at marketing, mostly, a lot of them. So they would be good at it if you could get private sector on board.
Any other suggestions?
So the issue, I mean, I agree with Dr. Nalika as well. So we have signed a few treaties as it is, and actually one of the SADP, one of the regional treaties which we are signatories to, and so they say one of the common things that is an issue upon the South Asian region is that there are too many laws. That there are too many laws which step on each other's authority. So at that point, no one will take action because they always expect the other department to take action. So we actually need a centralized law. Now we have about 6 or 7 laws that deal with the same subject matter. Now, for instance, if you're talking about snares, the reason that no one is really punished for the snares is because it comes under the Animals Act, and there's in a private property, because now with regard to wildlife, the law only exists when an action takes place inside one of those designated zones. So if it happens outside that designated zone, you can't be punished for it particularly. So if it's a snare, if it's in a private property, then you say, no, I have a right, if somebody strays onto my land, to capture, because you actually get compensated if you capture, so like a stray animal, but that act deals with owned animals necessarily. But you say, okay, yes, there was stray dogs that were coming into my land, or there were stray cattle coming into my land and destroy my property, which is why I had the snare. It was not for the leopard. The leopard just happened to come across. I had nothing to do with it. So one act deals with owned animals, then the other act deals with designated areas. And the problem with the designated areas is those regulations come from gazettes, and the designated areas are not necessarily part of the act. So when it's a gazette, it's a regulation where a minister will, as you quite rightly say, 5 of 2001, that's a gazette, can be overridden by another gazette. So it's a regulation as opposed to a law. So it is much easier to do away with those things when it becomes inconvenient or you want to do something else. So these are the subtleties that I think we also don't understand when we shout and say, listen, but these are the things that we can actually fix. They are the easily fixable things, as opposed to looking at an overarching thing that this is how it should be, but we should, I think, find the simpler things to fix. Now, for instance, as I was saying, the Animal Cruelty Act, in section 11 of the Act, actually enables you to funnel all the money that are earned as fines to societies that are established to prevent cruelty to animals. But the problem is it's 100 rupees at a time. So if you amend that of only that portion, so just amend section 3 where it says this is the penalty, increase it to 5,000 as you have done in the Fauna and Flora Act or on some of the other acts. So increase that fine, then yes, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, then that money means something as opposed to a 100 rupee fine that is that is going through, right? So then the amount that gets collected is more, and then you have a separate fund that gets that is a direct correlation to the welfare of animals. So there are little things that we can do.
Why don't they do?
Sorry to interrupt, but during COVID, there was this guy who came on social media and said, oh, you know, I can kill an animal, what does it matter, because all I have to pay is 100 rupees.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, unless punitive measures are put into place,
Absolutely.
where people
Absolutely.
actually feel it,
I agree completely.
this is not going to stop.
I completely agree, which is why I'm saying you can amend only the penalty. You don't have to amend the entire, because now, for instance, in that act, section 2 very clearly defines everything you were talking about. All those things are offences. But if you break it, it's 100 rupees. But if you amend that, amend the punitive part only, because that doesn't mean you need everybody to be on board and a new act and all the implications. You're just amending the punishment.
Is
Right.
that
I have
is
a dog
that,
with me right now,
Yeah.
which was stabbed 17 times. I was at the vets when this animal was brought in. And this man had, I mean, the guy who did it was drunk. This happened, I think, in Hokandara, that interior of Hokandara. And the guy who did it, he was drunk. And he stabbed this poor animal 17 times. And when he was asked, why did you do it? He said, oh, he ate my chicken. And then the guy who was standing next to him said, don't lie. You know very well, it is a mugatia that ate your chicken. So he stabbed the animal because he was drunk. That dog is now with me. It's a beautiful dog. It can't bark because in the process of all the stabbing, something has happened to its vocal cords. It was at Beske Animal Hospital for something like 2 months.
So how hard is it to amend these
So
things?
the issue is
Because we get the impression that it's really difficult to do.
I think people will
mean,
say it's very difficult
Well,
and
the
all that.
Animal Welfare Bill has been stuck God knows where for almost 30 years.
because it's a whole bill, right?
Yeah, so
I
that the
understand
whole
the
problem is
difference
it's an entire act in itself, and
Yeah.
then when you go and tell politicians that it's an entire act in itself, and they are very reticent to take any action on it. But this
Well, I don't think it's reticent. It's just that it doesn't benefit a politician
of
to
course
bring in an animal welfare bill.
no.
It doesn't buy the votes. They
But
can't
yeah,
make
but
any
the-
money on it.
But does it
Right?
disadvantage
It's as simple
them?
as that.
Why such reluctance? Does it disadvantage them in
In
some
a-
way?
in a country like ours?
I think Rushan, to the point where if there are a lot of, say, if there's a lot of regulations as to how, say, a national park is to be run, if there's a lot of regulations which actually punish people who are poaching.
See, Mahesh, the problem
And-
is we have regulations. It's implementing the
No,
punitive
no,
laws.
but I'm-
that is what
no,
we lack.
what I'm just saying is, like, he asked how it would disadvantage
Yeah.
them. I'm saying the more regulations you have, the more their voter base would get caught in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they will they'll call and harass the politicians and say, oh, I got caught for this, I got caught for this. As it is now, they'll say, you know, it's a fine,
Yeah.
you pay the fine and go. But the moment it is 25,000, 50,000, or
Yeah. Or a
you're going to
jail
spend
A
10 years in
substantial
jail,
I mean,
Then-
just look at the traffic rules, right? I mean, the bus people have protested traffic fines for driving without a license and stuff like that. I mean, you think that's a no-brainer, just carry your license and, you know, don't pay the fine. But there is a lot of pushback, I think.
The issue is, I mean, like, even if you look at, like, so the National Environment Act, for instance, says you have to give a rational exploitation of conservation of wildlife resources. That is all that you're required to do. Give a rational explanation. And for instance, the National Heritage Wilderness Area says it gives broad powers, but it has to be approved by the President and subsequently by a cabinet paper. So what's the point of giving these powers that if you have to jump through a million hoops to get them implemented?
Yeah.
Right? So that is where I agree with what SADC said. There's too many laws. So if we can find some way to centralize these things and give defined powers, so that say the wildlife department doesn't step on the forest department and all that sort of thing, then you see right now it's like, it's that person, no, it's that person, it's that person. So at the end what happens is no one takes responsibility.
There is overlapping.
There's massive overlapping. And there's interdepartmental fights that are going on.
Rivalries as
Yeah.
well.
Also, I think with these
Turf wars.
bigger acts like the new Animal Welfare Act, although those of us who've gone through it in detail know there's nothing there that's really worrisome or scary or going to, stop people from functioning in society or whatever. If you are politicians, I think you just worry about an act that is broad and has a lot of different areas. You feel you want to go through every single area and make sure everything is quote unquote safe to be implemented and is not going to be too much inconvenience. But most people don't have the time and energy to go through all the different aspects like that. So you just put it off and put it off and put it off when you have the time.
And at the end of the day,
and then it
will
doesn't
it
happen.
get me votes or will it not get me votes?
Because
That's
I
all
mean,
people are interested
if
in.
you look at the last two wildlife ministers, one publicly said, as the wildlife minister, my responsibility is towards the people and not the animals. And the other one went and gave guns and said, oh, shoot the elephants. Now that is blatantly illegal, because under the Fauna and Flora Act, you need a license even to shoot an elephant that is in your land. You can't just nilly-willy shoot an animal, shoot an elephant. So there has
to be prescribed or declared.
There has a lack of education
Lack of
amongst
knowledge.
the politicians, lack of political will.
Yeah.
First and foremost, there's a complete lack of political will, because it is not a big enough issue for them to take a stand on.
At least at this point. It
At
will
this-
become a big issue if we keep ignoring it.
Hopefully.
It's
You
not just
can't afford
political
to
will,
keep
it's a
ignoring
complete
it.
lack of humanity. I mean, to what levels have we humans descended to? We lack
No, but
humanity.
this
That's the
current-
And
beginning
I think
end
they're
of
not
it.
competent enough to understand
No,
But
what is happening.
this current minister is linked with wildlife criminals. So what he's doing in that office,
No, see,
needs.
It's a joke.
The issue is, again, I don't know whether we'll ever be fortunate enough for them to understand that it is a basic part of humanity, and that is why we should do it. At least I think we should get to the point where it is politically expedient for them to do it. I mean, I don't think
that's the easier way of
that
going.
is the easier way of
Although
doing
the
it.
right way of doing it is the other
I
way
don't know
around.
whether they'll do it because it is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll do it because it's the right thing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Therefore, they
I think
will do
that's
it.
more of a motivating factor.
So everything revolves around the vote.
Well,
Not-
in a
not
sense,
about
but I
anybody
think there are
else.
lots of
The
things that we
vote
can
and what
do.
benefits the individual, Minoli?
It's so sad.
Does it benefit me?
But
Protect an elephant.
Why are we
Does
so
it benefit me
selfish?
to protect?
We haven't come to live forever.
Well, I think
But
humans
people
have
are,
got
right?
to
I
that
mean,
stage.
not just in the case of this, but in the case of so many other issues.
No,
I
but
mean, I think
I also blame people at large. Now, few years ago, when Wilpat was being cleared, there was a huge hue and cry and said, oh, we are protesting, this government is bad, this and that. Completely, you should protest that. But when the government changed and Wilpat was still being cleared, there's not,
Not
a
a
hum.
word. Absolutely.
So, if you are taking a stand on principle, take that stand on principle
And stand by
and
it.
regardless of which political party you
Yeah, of
support,
course.
you have to keep taking that stand.
Yeah,
No,
of
it's
course.
because
Yeah.
it's completely politically motivated, those protests.
Yeah.
You can see now in
Yeah.
retrospect, because Wilpattu started getting cleared before the 2015 government formed.
Yes.
with government, with any government, whether it's this government or that government, they all look very short term. Within my 4 years or my 5 years, what can I do to make, to improve my position? But most wildlife issues, most animal welfare issues, to really do a good job of fixing them, to really have a really good impact on solutions, requires a long-term outlook. You're not looking at what you can do tomorrow or next year. You're looking at living in this planet for the next 500 years, through generations, for the next 10 years, having a water supply, having, not having climate change, not having disasters, having enough oxygen, not having too much carbon dioxide. All of these other complicated things are all long-term things. And I think the fundamental problem with politics is that you're looking very, very short-term.
I think by accident, after COVID, we have stumbled into this method in Yala now, where they are limiting the amount of jeeps that go into the park. I think it is a practice that we should continue.
No,
course.
but how is it limited other than if the visitor interest grows, are limits going to be
No, so
imposed?
again, I
Isn't
think
that because we don't have any tourists coming in now?
no.
Isn't that
That's
the
what, so
reason?
now, so
I don't
if you
know
if you
that-
if you if you go to India, for instance, right? You
The
know
parks are limited.
months in advance
Yeah.
which zone you all have to go to,
Yeah.
right? The amount of times that are going. So you have a licensing scheme which basically allows you to do that. Now Dr. Pilapitia's plan, actually, if you look at it, it's over a 5-year plan where you open up the
I
other
was
blocks.
part of that team.
Yes, so you would know, so that is a
Yeah, but
fantastic
that's,
plan.
that's not in implementation.
No, it's not. But that is a
Okay.
fantastic plan where you can actually then spread the vehicles out, right? So you're not concentrated on that one site in at Varahana Junction where there's a 500 jeeps waiting and you get to see the leopard for 2 seconds before going off, and the leopards don't have any peace and quiet or bear or whatever that happens. So if you actually spread out the jeeps, Yali is a big park. It's not a small park if you open out all
And
the
no,
other.
we propose zoning
Yeah.
and number restrictions for the different zones.
Yeah.
But the wildlife department fights back against it. They-
Because
I
it's
think they
it's
want
it's
more
work.
vehicles
It's
to come
work
in.
It's
because
work.
you have to do work to that, and then I think there's also a concern on the part of the jeep drivers that initially no one would want to go to the other zones, and therefore they would lose business, which in turn means they can't meet the leases that they have, and which mean so
But
these
that
are
was
all
the attitude
yeah.
for block 3 and 4 as well. But now they are not 4, 3 and 5,
Five.
but they happily go there now.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But so you
that
need,
is-
I think you need to have sort of at least a pilot to some areas so
Yeah.
that the jeep drivers learn it's not so bad. Because look at India. I mean, when we travel into some of those Indian parks, you know that only 50 people or 40 people are going to be allowed in that day. You sometimes stay 3 days in the area in order to be one of those 50 people and get a chance to go in. And nobody, everyone takes it for granted. Nobody complains, nobody fights about it, nobody gets upset about it. You just go do shopping, you spend money in that area, you go do other things, and you wait for your turn to go into the park. It's practiced
So
in
why
other
is it
parts
why
of the
is it
world.
not happening here?
we,
Why?
we have such short
don't
term
Yeah,
implement-
and we have
Implement-
also got
we
used
don't
to this
implement
way.
We got
the
used to
laws.
this way.
And politicians
And
back
we are lazy.
No,
as
it's-
it
it's-
is.
We just got used to
So,
this.
Minu,
We
the
aren't
issue-
used to anything
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And also the fact that I think
Or
if
we
you
don't
grease
want to have
somebody's
anything
We
palm,
don't want to
different.
change.
Mm,
if
it's
you
so-
grease
it's so
somebody's
short
palm, you
term.
can just go in.
Yeah, it's
you
a
can
short
break the
term
law.
view.
Yeah, and also it's more special interest groups, jeep driver associations and their lobby.
Yeah.
Then a big kind of corporate tourism in wildlife, they also have their own special interests.
Yeah,
They are the
because
ones
they want
who
X
block.
number of
A lot of
Yeah.
the things.
buses
yeah.
going
So
in.
it amounts
No,
to
not buses
corruption,
going
isn't
in.
it?
Yeah.
The
It's corruption
Exactly,
as
it
well.
amounts to corruption.
the issue is I think if you want, I don't think we are a mature enough society to have a bottom up approach where it'll organically go
Go,
there,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So even like now, for instance, Kenya has a big issue with the Maasai, right? It's not a perfect system because the Masai Mara is owned by the Maasai. So technically, every single lodge or whatever, the government has an agreement with the Maasai, and it's not perfect. And the Maasai act like total fools when they're in the park, when they're driving or whatever. But still, for all, they understand that the long-term economic benefit that they derive from having conserving
conserving the wildlife.
the wildlife.
Yeah. And
They
jeep
understand
drivers
that.
and all those people need to understand it.
Yeah.
If you make it lucrative for them, more lucrative than it is now for them, by conserving wildlife, by behaving well in the park, by not driving like maniacs inside there, by making your customer happy to spend 10 minutes seeing a leopard rather than 10 seconds, if they know that that is going to make them much more money, and if they and the only way they're going to know that is by trial and error. You can tell them that till the cows come home, they may not, unlikely they're going to believe you. But I think if you do a small pilot somewhere where they find it's really lucrative, or you really promote that in some way to them, that's the only way they're going to join in, because otherwise the jeep drivers, I mean, it's their livelihood. And same with the
And
farmers around the
And you
parks.
can't find fault with them
Yeah,
for
it's their livelihood.
And the worst kind of jeep driver is a creation of the tourism industry.
Yeah,
and
of
the
course.
industry steps back and pretends that they don't know how
Yeah,
this
of course.
kind of indisciplined rabble formed.
Yeah.
But I saw it in the making. I mean, I've been going to Yala frequently for long enough to see a time before all this chaos before mobile phones, before people called each other the moment they see an animal.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
a-
that's
it's
the
a-
first thing
So
they
it's-
should
it's-
stop. They
it's
should
a-
prevent
it's a
mobile phones
it's a
inside that
codependence
place.
now, right? So
Period.
because if you don't call and tell them,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
then the next time they see something, they won't call and tell you.
Yeah,
And
true.
I don't want to mention names, but there are
It's a
ministers
network.
who
There
are
insist on
ministers
getting
who do
phone
it,
calls
yes.
moment
Yeah.
there's a sighting as
Okay,
well, right?
and
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
We
You
all
don't need
know
to
that,
mention the
yeah.
name. Everybody knows the
Yeah.
name.
So
A minister.
a minister who
Yeah,
insists
from-
on getting phone calls every single time a sighting is there. So
Yeah, but it's the same with some of those in wildlife too, or so-called ecotourism ventures in the big corporates. They will pretend they know nothing about it, and the moment they put a comment saying that they want this situation changed, I put a comment saying you have contributed to it, and knowingly and willingly, and don't try to. You're part of the problem, so you're really not a part of the solution till you disentangle yourself from the problem.
Also, I think they,
I mean,
they
incentivize
Yeah.
people.
Yes.
but you also, I
give-
think, need to realize that it is in reality on the ground. It is really negative for wildlife tourism to have this. If you listen and look and read all the comments made by tourists, they're all bad, negative about the parks now.
like
And
if-
why
Even my
do
own-
you have people who are superior in that park? We all pay the same amount of money
it's not-
to get in there. We should be treated equally.
Yeah, but I think that's like
That's the Sri
true,
Lankan
but
politics,
that's a
right?
very
And
idealistic
you-
like
it's-
so
that's
like I
this
mean
country.
even if you look at like I mean the amount of the amount you have to pay for like something like Sabi Sands, I mean like some of the lodges run into like $3,000 $4,000 a night per
Oh,
person,
really?
right? And people willingly pay that.
They pay that.
They pay that because you go there, you get to spend half an hour, 45 minutes. Like
Yeah.
so only
It's-
two.
you pay for
on-
quality.
Only
Right.
two. So only two jeeps at a sighting. If you find the sighting, you can stay while the other jeeps rotates every 20 minutes.
Oh.
Right? Masai Mara is not that regulated, but it's huge. So you can have 50 jeeps and it's flat. You can have 50 jeeps lined up and they will still see. The problem is we have to find something that works for us. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you take the lessons from there and find something that works for us. For instance, the issue with a lot of the laws that we have now is it is up to the minister. So if you have a
And the
minister,
minister is most of the time an ignorant idiot.
yeah,
So
and if you have a minister, especially like now, who
So it
thinks
is
that
our
giving
fault
guns,
that we vote these idiots in.
But
Well,
it's
what
not-
kind? We don't have great
Vote the
choices.
appropriate people who
We
can
don't have
do
great
something
choices.
for the
so
country.
This
we
is
don't
the
have
choice.
write-in votes. We don't have anything. So we are also stuck with people, and most of the time the decent people don't want to run for positions of power. So, but
and actually you can't blame them
No,
because
you can't,
the
you can't.
system is set up in a way that they'll cut them down in no time at all.
so I mean, for instance, there's like very real. I mean, I've went through all these treaties that we have signed up for. On paper, we look really good because we
Yeah,
have this
we look
act, we
great
have
on
the
paper,
act
that's
of
what I keep-
animal cruelty, we have act that deals with everything else.
lots of legislation,
Lots of
but no
legislation that we
implementation.
have. And
Yeah.
so as far as we are as far as if you go and compare with other countries who have these who are signatories of these treaties, I mean we look really good, but the problem is when it comes down to it, it is a regional issue that we have too many acts dealing the same thing, so there's massive overlap and zero efficiency in implementing those laws.
And I'm sure that lots of people go overseas as well to get enough exposure and experience in these acts.
Especially now.
But they don't come back and impart that to us
No,
or
not
to
at-
their team.
Not only that, the wildlife department is supposedly has the highest amount of training. I mean, if you look at the amount of training that they've gone abroad for, or how many people have been trained, or training hours, or the money spent on training, they are the most highly trained even in the scientific service. But here they run things like they have never seen how best practices happen in
But
other
you know,
countries.
also they are limited by the politics coming down. No, in all these departments, that's what I find. You might have good people in the department who want to do something the right way in lots of departments across the board in this country, but they don't
They are not
stand
supported.
up for. They
Even
don't
if they
stand up for their
Navalika,
belief
they don't
and
get the
fight
support
because they
from
know.
their
No,
peers.
Yeah, they know the
From
consequences
their-
are going
from
to
their
be there.
superiors.
I have to say, my experience with the wildlife department, equally there are bad people
And there are some
who
very
are
good
there like a glove fit for a corrupt minister
Yeah.
to be able to manipulate the
it comes from
department.
top
and
But
down
again,
then.
again,
Yeah.
I think Rukshan would know more about this than I do, because I had a conversation with the tracker web. Now they've been there for like 20 years, but they're still temporary employees,
Yeah,
and they
there you
don't
go.
have rights. Right. So again, that is an issue, because
They're scared to
have
say anything, do
not,
anything.
Not only that, because they have no incentive to do
Yeah,
better.
Yeah, they have no incentive
Because
to do it.
as far as they're
They're
concerned,
going to
we are
lose their job.
temporary employees, we are not going to get our pension, so
Yeah.
we will make money from wherever else that we are going to make money.
Exactly.
And again, not to blame them, because they're stuck at this job and for
And
all
also
these
look
years
what
without
will
But
happen.
you
I
know
mean,
why
look,
that is.
look
no?
realistically what will happen to a tracker who goes in a vehicle with a higher up kind of person, politician or anyone of influence, and if they complain about them, or if they pull them up to say don't behave in this way or do whatever, it's not that person who's going to pay for it. That poor tracker is going to be transferred to the boondocks or lose his job completely or something like that.
and
So,
so
people don't have a culture of,
I'm-
as a culture we don't stand up for what is right, because we fear the repercussions of standing up for what is right, and because there are repercussions and they can be
Yeah,
pretty
it's
bad.
also we live in a very chauvinistic society, isn't it? Where might is right.
exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Right
I'm-
is not right.
I'm-
Might is
So
right.
we really need a system change, somebody to give us the right lead.
Yes.
So I really don't like to blame the Jeep drivers, because they're the
Yeah.
easy target.
Small people are not
they are
who
the
you
easy
want to
target.
blame,
It's
yeah.
not the trackers, it's
Yeah.
not the Jeep drivers
Exactly,
only.
it's
But
up,
as
down.
Rukshan very well said, all the hotels there. Now you see, now this online ticketing system has come, and I was telling somebody what happens when all the hotels book up all the online tickets for months on end. No one from outside will be able to go.
Yeah.
So unless there is a lottery system or something that has to come into play, and we expand the amount of jeeps that go into the other areas as well, it's not going to work. So just limiting the jeeps that are going into the park
Or
is
you
not
have
going
to
to
limit
And
how
that-
much each hotel
yeah,
can
if-
have, how many
If it's
guests
a-
they can have, or save 20% for the general public or 40% for the general public, because that happens all over. I mean, not just Sri Lanka, in Africa, same thing. If you book in South Africa, if you book 2-3 years in advance, you can go to the parks at very, very reasonable cost. But as it comes close to the date, the big tour agencies buys all the tickets and all the bookings and all the everythings, and then you have to pay about 500 times what you would
Yeah.
normally pay to get into any of those places. So it happens everywhere.
And
You just need to restrict it. If you are having a restricted number of jeeps going in, I mean, it happens in India and happens all over, you need to have a system that opens it out, not just to the big hotels and the big tourists, but leaves a certain percentage
so
open
there
to
should
the
be
wildlife
quotas.
department.
Quotas
But
for
the
different,
sad thing
interests.
about this whole thing is that we have this amazing product, right? People
have a
pay
beautiful
millions
product, yeah.
and millions and millions to go and see leopards, because
it-
a lion actually at the end of the day will just lie down there for hours on end. You're going to see, it's not
Yeah.
excessive. People
They're
pay
still
millions
beautiful.
Yeah.
to go and
Absolutely.
they'll spend 7 days to see 4 leopards. Or 4 leopard sightings.
And
Here,
even
if you spend
elephants?
7 days, you're going to see at least 13, 14 sightings, right? So, like continuously. So, we have this amazing product where people will pay top dollar to come. They will pay that amount of money to come here.
Yeah.
For instance, like 2,000, they'll pay that, and the Jeep, everybody will benefit. But the people who pay that money don't want to be there with
50 other people.
50 other people.
Yeah.
Aren't we truly blessed to be in a country like this? You're
It
talking
is.
about this beautiful leopard. Should we save it? I'm afraid we'll have to stop again for a short commercial break. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back to TALKWALK. In this episode, where we focus on animal rights and welfare, it's question time. What do you think the solutions and the sustainability in the elephant-human conflict?
I think, Minoli, at the end of the day, it's a case of you lead by example. And I hope everyone who's listening in to this program uses their vote conscientiously, responsibly, because you lead by example. And that's what this country lacks. Rules, legislature, gazette notifications, they're all very well. But if our leaders don't lead by example, all the legislation in the world falls by the wayside. Leaders have to lead by example. Laws need to be enforced and implemented, and punitive measures have to be set in place. Without that, our tourism will be lost, our biggest foreign exchange earner, which is tourism, will be lost. Our humanity is eroded. And we as a nation, there is no point us spouting Buddhism and ahimsa and dharmishta every step of the way. It's actually a joke because we don't practice it.
Where will the elephant habitat be relocated? Because the villages are going through hell. The poor animals are suffering. They have no habitat. What do you think? What is the solution?
Well, the way I see it in all my experience and time looking at this human elephant conflict problem, if you look at the macro picture, it is a politician created problem of putting people in elephant lands.
Yes, we all
and
agree.
the colonization and the settlement of lands that were for centuries, actually for millennia, elephant habitat. That needn't necessarily have become converted to agriculture or converted to farmlands, because they're perfectly sound lands that didn't have elephants that could have become farmland and become the settlement areas. So without zoning, planning, especially politicians at the local level either allow people to settle illegally after deforesting lands that have elephants, or they deliberately have settlement schemes and plans to build houses or build settlements in lands that elephants occupy. So since they are animals that for centuries travel the same paths, go to the same feeding areas and go to the same water resources, the elephants keep going in there long after that is no longer wilderness land, and the conflict exacerbates because there are houses, they knock down houses, they find that where there was natural food, there is no natural vegetation anymore, there are crops instead. Some of the crops are more palatable than the natural vegetation, so they start crop raiding. So the problem goes on, and this is repeated and replicated all over the country. So the macro problem is one of a lack of planning, a lack of understanding about elephant behavior, and a lack of caring to understand that elephants need their space and we can share this island with elephants. I have a different take to a lot of people on who this island actually belongs to. This island doesn't belong to people. It really belongs to the animals that originally colonized and occupied it, because most animals, whether it's elephants or leopards or bears or certainly birds who just flew across when this was a habitable place, this was all wilderness. Long before pre-humans even got here, there is evidence that elephants and leopards and other animals occupied it. So who are the visitors and who are the immigrants coming into this land? It's humans. So who is sharing this island with whom? Animals are sharing this island with humans. It's not the other way around. So if we, just because we have high intelligence, have more knowledge, well, I think we have high intelligence, but less ability to use our brains to understand that we need to have a sustainable future on an island, because we destroy the very life support systems that exist in an island, whether it's watersheds or whether it's soil fertility or whether it's beach security or whatever. And so we have every duty, if you're talking about animal rights and animal welfare, we have a duty to protect, safeguard habitat and live and let live on this island. Instead, we are in a land contest with elephants. We are pushing them against the wall, right to the edge. We will push them off this island if we can. And all the time we talk about our great culture and our great tolerance of elephants. So
and
this
ride
is
them in Pereharas.
and yes, and
the torture.
and the torture,
And the
the
torture
cruelty.
they go through,
Yeah,
my
but
God.
well, it's never characterized as torture.
Don't you agree with me that people should be accountable on these people who is destroying this land?
So
Where do we stand there?
It's a bit of a problem now. I don't know how practical it is to move an entire village now, right? But I do feel we need to identify
For the sake
some
of lives?
Yeah, but I'm saying we need to identify certain nature trails and protect them, not just through the gazette, because the problem is now all these lands, like the state land or state forest land, all this it's through gazette, right? So I am saying it has to be enshrined in a way that some local politician cannot basically issue a gazette and change the designation of that area of land. So I personally, I think it has to be a combination of a conservation fund, protecting nature trails, and a vibrant education, like targeted education system where you teach these villagers from a young age the benefits of conserving wildlife. So it's not a problem that we can solve in 1 year or 2 years. I think it's more maybe 10 years down the line, but it has to be in a situation where we have to basically protect those trails that the elephants, at least to the point that that the trails that they used to
have traditionally used.
That they have traditionally used.
I mean, there is a inward, unlike in Africa, there are no long-term migrations, long-distance migrations, but they find, researchers have said that there are inward and outward migrations depending on the weather. With rainfall, they disperse into areas that are lush after the rains, and during the drought, they come into areas where the water resources are still intact, and they restrict some of their movement. So as a result, these things are, they are not happening in an arbitrary fashion.
No.
They have happened in a seasonal fashion for thousands of years. So with that being the case, and the knowledge we have and the way we can do research and determine these things, there's no excuse to go and put people where elephants have always gone, or always
See,
lived.
something we learned today, but Rukshan says that the animals were long before us.
We
Yeah, they were here long before
We are
us.
only birds of passage
But I think
here.
going back to what Rukshan said, which I think is really a very fundamental issue that we can focus on, is that not only are we blessed as an island with an amazingly varied and beautiful environment, I mean, we just are really lucky compared to a lot of parts of the world, but we are also blessed with a lot of knowledgeable people with good scientific background, good research capacity in any area. You take any subject that is a problem, and you can find in this country a significant number of people who really understand that problem. But policy is not based on that, and that's where I think we need to see a shift. We need to see policymakers utilize the people who have knowledge on these areas to create policy that will be more effective from both sides. The policymakers will be happy because the policies will have results, impact, and real outcome that they are looking for, but policymakers don't at this stage utilize that knowledge to make these policies. And once the policies are made, then the policymakers need to come in, and even there you probably have specialists who can come in to ensure that they are implemented systematically, implemented effectively, that it's overlooked properly. I mean, that, if we do that, we have so much we can achieve in this country.
The point
But
is,
that's
if
the
you show
tragedy of this
talent,
country.
if you show talent in our country, you become a threat to the people who are uneducated. Okay, so that person is got rid of.
But that's true in any country. We should be able
Well,
to overcome
the
it.
issue, I think if you're looking at practical issues in the short term, I mean, like practical problem solving, I think we definitely need to make use of this provision where the fines that are collected goes to societies that are fighting against animal cruelty. I think that is something that can be easily done because it's already there.
increase the fines.
Yeah, increase the fines, yes, but I'm saying make sure that provision is implemented where the money doesn't go back to the treasury or anything else, but make sure that goes into this. That is number one.
Yeah, at the moment, Mahesh, where does this small
So
the
it's
treasury,
fines
it
go?
goes
It goes
because
treasury.
because the court uses it as a fine and then it goes into the department where the fine, all those fines are collected. So it's
But
like
not into any
So
special fund.
not into any special fund. So I don't think people were
How do
aware
we-
that this
Basically,
provision.
How do we
ends up in the
introduce that
treasury.
clause in?
It's
So
there. We
it's
didn't
there.
even know it
It's
was
there.
right?
It's there.
So why is it not implemented?
That-
Because
that is-
nobody
Nobody
knows.
even knew about it. I
We
didn't
didn't
know.
This is the
about
first
it.
time
This is
I'm
the first
hearing
time
about
I'm
it.
Yeah,
hearing
so
about it.
it's actually there. And number two is we need to make sure, like, again, slight amendments. Like, for instance, it's common sense, right? If it's an endangered species, it doesn't matter whether it is inside a
Park or
designated
anywhere, yeah, that's
park
a big
anywhere.
problem, I think, yeah.
You should
I think
not
that's a big problem.
you should not take any action against, and there should be punishment for that.
Yeah.
So right now you can't harm a leopard inside a park, but if
Yeah.
it's outside,
No, but you still can't, no? Because
no,
the
so
FFPO does protect it.
but with the snares, it's inside their
The
private
snares.
property. So the Animals
animals
Act
here.
basically says if a stray animal comes into this thing, you can. So it doesn't say it means owned animals, but the defense is always, oh, listen, I set it up for a stray dog, stray cattle. I didn't set it up for the leopard.
No, but still.
But still, isn't a snare
You can't
a
prove.
Willfully,
No,
you can't willfully.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but
that's-
how?
But it's not willful.
But it's
Snare is
happening
not
every
willful.
day.
Snare is
It's
not
happening
willful.
every day.
No, why is
the
Why
other
is it
issue
not
there is
willful?
just
No,
because
so-
you
so-
aren't meaning to kill a leopard.
So
you're meaning to
the
kill a
defense is
Killing
I
is
am
killing
not,
or
I didn't
whoever.
have the
It-
snare
but-
for the
yeah.
leopard.
So
Yeah.
how does he
No, but
prove
killing
that?
is killing.
So he doesn't have to prove that.
He
It's,
doesn't
if it's
have to
if it's
prove,
in
yeah.
his if it's in his
In his
private
property.
he will say, no, this cattle broke in and was eating this, or this dog came and
Okay.
destroyed my this. So I put it for the dog. I did not have it for the leopard.
Leopard.
The leopard just happened to come. So this is what we know. Where the leopards are getting caught, we don't even know where they are skinning them and selling them and all
Yeah,
that.
tomorrow
sort
is
of
the
thing.
next hearing of that case of the black leopard
Okay.
snaring.
Okay.
Though he was released on bail, I
Yeah.
don't know what they are going to.
Yeah.
uh,
So again, the
talk
issue
about
is it's just
tomorrow.
like he will go and say. So unfortunately, that's what I'm saying. Another way you can look at it is to make it strict liability offences,
Yeah.
right? So maybe not make the jail term as strenuous, but make the fine bigger.
Yeah.
I think the fine is really what hits
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, the setting of a snare is an illegal act.
Absolutely, it should
So,
be.
How can
it
they
should
how
be
can
a
they
so
legal.
the
snare even in your
issue
own
is the
premises?
reason that they're doing it is there's also in the animal cruelty. Like if I was the defense lawyer, I'd say, listen, I have rights under the Animals Act. If someone is disturbing my possession, I actually, for ensnaring and capturing that animal, I also get compensation, right? There is a provision. So I will say this is a way of me doing it because I don't know what is going on. So then he will get that 2,000 rupee fine and he will walk
No,
off.
but then under the Fauna and Flora Protection Act, if you cannot kill a leopard in any land,
Inside the state land.
um,
It says in those designated areas you can't. But you're right, you can't kill a leopard in the sense like you can't go after a
You should
leopard
do
and poach him.
Yeah.
But I'm saying if it gets
Accidental
accidentally
killing,
gets
as
caught,
accidental killing.
then
Caught
it
in a
doesn't fall
snare,
under
it
the
doesn't-
yeah,
under the
but then
same.
if you have set a illegal snare,
Yeah.
whether it accidentally catches a leopard or
But is
whether
it
was
illegal
intent-
on your own land?
So the issue
I think
is,
that the use of a snare is illegal
I
anywhere.
think
use
so.
of
snare is
use of-
an
yeah,
illegal
yeah, illegal.
device.
yeah, so use of the snare is illegal. I'm saying the defense that they're going to take it.
Okay.
This is why I used it because it is
Okay.
coming into my
But
land.
then
but
can
then
you use something that is
the
illegal?
So you
basic
can fine the
premise
man for
it's
putting a
illegal.
snare.
Yeah, so it's a fine.
It's
It's
a
a fine
fine.
of
It's
2
like
to
2,000
5,000
rupees
rupees.
or something.
So you're
Maximum of
right.
20,000.
Increase the fine.
Yeah.
Maximum of
Yeah,
Yeah, but
20,000.
in the case of this black leopard,
Yeah.
there is a lot of evidence to show that they deliberately snared the black
Yeah, so
leopard.
then that is
because
the
he
difference.
was using
Yeah.
that path and people had seen him.
What
So
a
that
beauty
is
we
the
lost.
difference. So, but
Yeah.
there's also, I think the reason these things are coming out is also because there's a lot of national interest
Yeah.
in
In
the
the
matter.
black
So
yeah.
now, how many times does this kind of thing happen that we
Where there
have
is no
no
interest.
idea about?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
not
is
just
why
almost
we
every
put a
week,
lot
no?
of pressure on
Not
the
every
wildlife
week, it's
department
almost
because they can
daily.
easily
Yes.
find
Virtually daily.
what the real
Yeah.
problem is.
So
And,
right now we are saying, oh, this snare, and now because of that, all the other instances of snares being used to capture leopards are coming out. It's on social media, but
Yeah.
that is why we as a people have a responsibility and not only blame the politicians, because if we don't have the will
Yeah.
to do something
Absolutely,
about
yes.
it, like it's like the Vilpattu is a prime example. Everybody was screaming, shouting Vilpattu. No one is saying a word now. It's not even a it's not even an issue.
Yeah.
So if you have principles and if you're fighting on principles, then your principles, regardless of which political party you support,
to
has
stand
to
by
remain
them.
constant.
And then even if you take the issue of snares, right? I mean, regardless of what animal you're talking about, it doesn't matter who you're
Snares
talking
should
about.
not be set up.
Snares are such a cruel way for an animal
Absolutely.
to die.
Should be prohibited.
It should be.
It gives torture
you don't
and
need
slow
it
death
to be
to
prohibited.
the
You should,
animal.
as a responsible human being, be able to just say no to snares. Even if you're a farmer, even whoever you are, I don't
Yeah.
see how you cannot see how cruel a snare is, and put leopards aside. Even if it's a dog or
Any animal
pig or
should
any
not
What,
be caught in
what
a
type
snare.
of
It's just such a
human being
horrible
can
thing.
think of
See, the thing is,
Putting up a
if it's a
snare.
dog that got caught in a snare, no one would pay any
Do
attention to
anything
it,
about
right?
it. Yes,
So if
true.
it
or
is
pig,
actually
forget
for
a dog,
True.
but if
Yeah.
it's a wild boar,
if
no?
it's
Yes.
a wild
How
boar,
many?
and
a lot
anyway
of
now
snares are for
the
wild
rules
Because
with
they eat
regard
the
to
wild
wild
with
boar
the
has
flesh.
been relaxed
And
somewhat
nobody
anyway,
cares,
right?
Yes.
about wild boar. I mean,
So-
nobody thinks that
Nobody
wild
thinks.
boar
That's
have
also-
any
So
rights.
Have
It's a-
any feelings?
You know,
Yeah, or any rights
but
or
it's
any
a big
feeling,
it's a big
it's just a
industry, right?
wild
So
boar.
many people have wild boar, and it's like
People
it's a
eat it.
delicacy.
It's a delicacy, yeah.
Yes.
at the end of the day,
Even porcupines.
Yes.
whether you this is all about Dadamas.
Absolutely.
And also they can be destructive,
Yeah.
being honest. I
Yeah.
mean, the porcupines and wild boar and
Yes.
monkeys and
Of
all of these animals can
But
be destructive.
again, it's because
But-
we have encroached into their territory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also
Simple
the
as
sense that we don't have a sense that we should be living together with
Together
animals,
with
and
animals.
that
Yeah, but
they are living their own lives. That may be destructive to us and destructive to us, but they are doing what is
Yeah.
normal for them as a different species,
Yeah.
and that sort of idea is not there yet.
Yeah, but
you
there is
know.
a role that wild boar play that is not
There is a
appreciated
role.
in this
Of
country.
course,
Because
wild
now
boar
in
have-
rewilding
of
land
course,
in
of
England, they
course.
find that bringing some kind of feral pig
Yeah.
into the land
Yeah.
completely transforms the regeneration of the land.
Okay.
Yeah.
Until the pigs came and turned the soil, and
Yeah.
the worm activity increased, and
Yeah.
though they eat the worms in the soil, they are also turning the soil and making it more conducive to microorganisms
And that's true
small
with
animals.
any animal, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if
Even
you take
the
any
earthworm has a
organism,
role.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
any
Such an
organism on the
important
planet,
role.
if you study them enough,
which is-
you know they do some really important good.
Which is why I say, like, we cannot have conservation without making the other part, the affected parties, economic partners. Now,
Yeah,
if
I
every
agree.
single time, say,
Yeah.
a leopard attacks somebody's
Say with
dog or
monkeys,
something,
same
and
with anything else.
like a small calf or whatever
Yeah.
it takes, if you're compensated for it, then you don't have this innate need to have a snare and capture the leopard and
Yeah.
kill the leopard or poison the leopard. Or if the elephants come destroy your crops, okay, there is a system, we go through it, we assess it, this is how much you would have lost, we are
Yeah, paid
compensating you
So
for
compensation.
it.
WNPS is looking at a compensation system for
Okay.
animals that are rather livestock that is killed by
Okay.
leopards.
And if
But
fines can be used to pay
verification.
that would, like you said,
That
if
is,
those
it
fines
has
are
to
collected
be
and
a
used to pay
centralized
that,
system.
that's excellent.
That is where you
Well,
need
this is
government
of course
help.
Yeah.
private, because they
Of
look
course.
for funding from a bank or somebody, because the state is not doing
No,
it.
state won't do it. But
State
I am
really should
saying,
be
why
looking at
why not
compensation.
use the hotels, like we have like 100-room hotels, like whatever that is benefiting out of this
Yeah, that
wildlife.
itself is wrong.
Yeah.
Having a 100-room
Abs-
hotel next to a national park.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a completely
Yeah,
different
it's
conversation.
That's another
Long
whole
planning.
episode.
Long
Yeah.
planning.
Yeah, so if you have to levy some kind of this thing where
Yeah.
they also contribute towards
absolutely.
it.
And it's
towards that
true
fund.
not just
Yeah, and
with
they'll
the
be
big
happy to
species,
pay
even
right now, I
monkeys.
think.
Yeah.
I mean, not right now, not with this post-COVID
Yeah.
post-COVID situation, but at another time, because they do. I mean, they're direct beneficiaries of national parks and conservation areas and wildlife department
At the hotel.
that
The
exists,
whole
because they are not
tourist
doing anything
industry.
to sustain
Yeah.
the resource.
The
And-
whole tourist industry should play an active role in conserving wildlife, because
Absolutely.
if the wildlife is decimated the way it is being, there won't be a tourist industry for
Yeah.
very long.
No, so I don't see the way I see it, that the tourist industry in this country can benefit a lot more from wildlife.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Where we
Yeah,
are, I
for
think
sure.
we are at about 25% of
Yeah.
our potential
Yeah.
with regard to
Yeah.
wildlife
Yeah.
tourism. We
Yeah.
can,
And we can
there
do
is
it
so much
responsibly.
more
Yeah.
that we can, and there is so much money in it that people are paying millions in other countries to do this.
Absolutely.
We are not harnessing our
We
true
are not, we are
potential,
not,
but
at all.
neither are the authorities, the powers that be in the tourist industry, they are not playing.
Yeah, we
an
are not
important-
husbanding
They are not
this
playing
resource.
any role at
Because
all
I think a few years
in
ago,
conserving wildlife.
Yala alone made about 800 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About 800 million, and which goes straight to the treasury.
Yeah,
Doesn't come
nothing
back.
comes
And
back
then
to
you have to
Yala.
you have to
Yeah.
beg them to
Yeah.
make the roads inside the park.
So then you can also, we don't see the figures, but you can understand how much the big corporates in wildlife tourism make.
Must be making, yeah.
But what do they actually contribute?
Yeah.
And why don't they contribute more?
Yeah, the
And,
more important question is
because
actually
I have
why
asked-
don't they? Why
Exactly.
don't they?
I have asked them, and
Yeah.
what they say is very difficult to work with the wildlife people. And I said,
No.
you have to make it work.
You have to make
Yeah.
it work.
Even if
Yeah.
it's difficult to, kind of have partnerships, you should have partnerships.
Yeah.
But the type of partnerships they like to have are individually beneficial partnerships that are under the table.
Okay.
I mean,
I
I
mean,
know
if
enough
the
of what has
entire
happened.
tourism
between-
industry
there's so
got
much,
together.
yeah,
But
and
the tourism
greenwashing that
industry
goes
can
on.
do so much.
The easy excuses, if we give money to the wildlife
In fact,
department,
some
we
of
don't
them
know what will
should
happen.
be in
to
a
it.
forum like
But
this.
they don't even
then
have to
they can
necessarily give money.
either
There are
defend
other
or
things they can do. I mean, there's so many other things they can do. If they support the jeep drivers
Yeah.
to be responsible and do a good job, and if they have even their clients write a report up on the jeep driver they go with. I mean, I know my brother stayed in one of these fancy hotels coming from abroad with some friends and went in a jeep ride, and he has permanent back problems from that day onwards because the driver was driving like a maniac through the park, and he really slipped a disc, and he was young, he was in his 30s, early 30s.
So
He slipped a
again,
disc,
Yeah.
and he has permanent health problems.
Chicken
as a
and egg
result.
situation again, right? Because
It's the parks.
because the wildlife tourists we get are not the die-hard wildlife tourists who understand you have to go to the park 3-4 times to see something.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
get the
So
ones
that
who are there for a
education can be
day,
done by the
The
and they-
backpackers.
you are there for a
want to see
day
something.
who want to see something, and the jeep driver's tip depends on whether they see something
Yeah.
or not. So it's not an easy thing to
Yeah.
just blame the jeep
No,
driver.
but
it's
the,
easy
what
No,
I'm
I'm
saying
not
is the
blaming
hotels,
jeep
not
drivers
the jeep
either.
drivers. So hotels can
It's not-
educate
Yeah,
the,
exactly.
the people who are in their hotel and say, this is what you should expect, this is what you're going to see, this is how you should behave, follow these rules, and give a tip based on this. I mean, the
But
hotels can
Nalini, you're
educate
being
the people.
very
in the
idealistic. The
place.
reality is that's not what happens.
Yeah.
I know people who work in the corporate wildlife tourism industry who are senior, who have been in it for a long time, who actually encourage, actually select the jeep drivers who are the fastest and the
Yes,
most reckless
yes.
drivers who get the sighting for their client.
I know, so that's what they
And
have to
then
change.
they talk
That-
some
So
BS
those are
elsewhere.
the things that have to change. Those are the things
Absolutely,
that
they have to change. Until
This
they
is
change.
such a complex topic, and so far and wide we have gone. I hope the policymakers will take heed of what you are saying, all the facts that you have presented this evening. I'm afraid this is all we have for you this episode. So until next Wednesday, please tune in to our television at 6:30. Thank you for watching. This is Minoli de Almeida signing off.